Okay, testing 1, 2. I think we're good to go. Looks like I have at least one other viewer besides myself, because of course I'm monitoring this on my laptop beside me. Can I be heard okay? Are you able to hear me all right? I do have the chat windows open, so I should be able to respond and see things as people may ask questions for any that happen to view. Okay, so what we have here is an Intellivision II console, and it's going to be getting fitted with one of these. And this is an RGB upgrade board from the individual in the modding community known as the CKing, which he has somewhat of a checkered past, I think, but that's mainly, I think, from his actual technical modding skills. And be that as it may, I will tell you that the boy has redeemed himself in my eyes for the simple fact that these boards that he has designed for the Intellvision are really something else. They're amazing. So if you're not familiar with it, it's this right here. And it's called the Orange Peel, OP, version 3. He's had a couple of different RGB boards that he's made, but this is his latest one. Actually, that's upside down. I apologize. And it's really cool because in addition to providing RGB output, and he's even included the ability to run bypass for the red, green, and blue signals so that you can use it with Sega RGB type cables. In addition to the RGB output, it also provides really, really good composite and S video output. In fact, even for clients or customers that only want composite output, I still use this board, even though it's for RGB, I only use this board now for all of the composite outputs because it provides such more consistent and better results compared to the cheaper kits. Slightly cheaper. I say slightly cheaper because some of the dedicated composite only boards for the Intellvision can still run, 30 bucks US when shipped. This here is about $35 shipped. So really, for the extra $5 to $10 that this board might cost, it is worth it for the improved picture quality it provides on all of its outputs. So yeah, so the basic plan with this one is the owner of this Intellivision II console already has RGB in place in their setup on their other consoles. So they have specifically requested that I wire it up for Sega Genesis 9-pin mini-DIN use. So what that's going to entail, in addition to installing the board, is on the actual backside of the console, right here you have the RF output. And what we're going to do in this installation as part of a no-cut solution for this is I'm going to be removing the RF output modulator, and that will be replaced with the 9-pin mini-DIN output, which will make it a lot easier to access it. I don't have to put any additional holes in the case at all, which, to be honest, there's not a lot of room on the Intellivision II. The only spaces where you really have any room to install anything additionally is in this section here, which you can't see because I'm off camera. Down here, because it's actually empty on the inside of the case shell, on the other side of this, down on the bottom. And I guess along the other bottom parts as well, but then you have to be careful to isolate the connectors that you put in place because you don't want them to potentially short against the main board inside. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So I've already tested this console. It seems to be working 100%, no issues. So that's good. That's one less troubleshooting step. So in addition to the RGB board, the kit also comes with some RCA jacks. It comes with an S-Video panel mount jack. It also comes with an 8-pin panel mount RGB, which I, again, will not be using in this. But then it also comes with these, and these are really cool. These are little PCB, trying to think of how to word it basically, but they're basically breakout boards. So the purpose of them is that there's, well, these are both the same type, so that doesn't help you much. Do I have one of the other ones laying around here? I should. One moment, please. There. That's the other board. So there's two different boards. One is designed to be used off of the color IC chip, which is this one here, the more rectangular one. And then this one here that has the pads in the center of the board and doesn't have as many pins going around it and actually is a little bit smaller. This was designed to be used off of the stick graphics processor chip. And that's what I'm going to be doing in this instance. And that mainly has to do with just distance. It's just more convenient for where I end up installing the board for the inputs. So I end up using this breakout PCB off of the stick graphics IC chip on the Model 2. But on the Model 1s, I tend to use the color IC breakout instead. So let me get those out of the way here. And again, I'll be needing that a little bit later. I'll also be using one of these. Now, what is this? This is actually of my creation. You can barely make it out here, but it's got my logo in the center of it. This is a small PCB that is not a circuit of any kind. I've designed it as basically a mount board for mini DIN connectors. It can use either 8 or 9 pin mini DINs because, to be honest, they are all the same size. So here's a 9 pin, for instance, and then here's one of my 8 pins. Now the PCB breakouts I have are a little different size. I do that on purpose so that I can more easily look in the box that I have here and know exactly which one's 8 and which one's 9. So I'm able to do that by using the rounded corners or the square. Anyway, so yeah, I can use either type here. I'll center that more so you guys can see that. And the way it's designed is whenever I have all of this put together, I will end up installing this board and soldering it in place where the RF modulator was at, near the output section, and then the actual mini DIN will sit on top of this and solder it down to the PCB. And it does mean that the mini DIN ends up being installed upside down, which is not super convenient, I realize, but if you're familiar with triple bypasses that are done on Sega Genesis systems, we do the exact same thing. The replacement mini DIN connection that's installed, which is going to be a 9 pin in the case of Sega systems, it's going to be installed upside down because we do the same thing. We just solder it directly where the RF modulator used to be or where the old AV output might have been located. So yeah, now you might be asking yourself, why do I have this little mount board? Well, there's two reasons for it. One is it makes it a little easier for me to be able to sit it in place and line it up. You'll be able to notice barely that I do have some tiny little castenated vias off to the side. That's because I designed that to fit in a very particular place on the Model 1 Intellivision that happens to line up with some leads off of some components that are attached to ground, which acts as a good anchor point. But then I also have this one strip along the bottom front here that allows me to solder it into place onto the actual RF grounding area itself on either the Model 1 or the Model 2. So it helps to kind of get this lined up, get it into place, and allows me to more easily mount the mini DIN jack because this PCB is smaller than the large ground plane that I might normally want to solder it to, so I don't have to apply as much heat for as long to get this to attach. But the main reason why it exists is because when you install one of these mini DIN jacks, and this is true for both the Model 1 and the Model 2, when you solder one of these down into place on the main board, it actually ends up sitting just a little bit too low in the case of the Intellivision II, making it difficult to actually plug a cable in. Or in the case of the Model 1, it ends up sitting too high. So yeah, that becomes kind of a problem. Did I just lose my stream? Hey Blaine, yeah, I am live. I can't tell if my stream has died or not. I was seeing a picture of my stream earlier, and I'm not seeing it now on YouTube, so I can't tell. Okay, no, it's still there. It's live. For some reason, they just decided to blank out the picture of it my monitoring picture. Okay, who knows? We should be okay. Anyway, so as I was saying, the main reason for designing this was to actually lift the mini DIN up off the PCB or off the main board just high enough to basically center it perfectly on both the Model 1 and Model 2 systems. And so as a result, this PCB that I had made, these mount boards, they're actually thicker than standard PCBs. This is roughly about 2.5 millimeters thick. And in fact, I only really found one PCB fabrication place that was willing to make these because of the thicknesses I needed, and that was PCBWay. Now, they're not, I'm not endorsing them. They're not sponsoring this or anything. I'm just saying that's who I ended up having to go through in order to get those mount boards made. Luckily, I had a whole bunch of them made, so I should be good for a while. Anyway, let me get this stuff out of the way. Let me go ahead and get this console apart and get started on what needs to be done. All right, taking apart the Model 2 Intellivision is crazy simple because there's only 2 Phillips head screws. Oh, nice. This one's never been opened before. Had that nice distinctive crack. Those spots, yep. I'm going to say I'm the first person inside of this. That's a good thing. It means I don't have to worry about running into surprises. Both of the Phillips screws, by the way, although they are at different depths inside the plastic, they're the exact same size, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, once that is done, then it's just a matter of lifting it up from the front, and the whole thing basically just hinges right off of there. Intellivision 2's got to be the simplest console to open up that I'm aware of, just because it's just so basic and simple to do that. No other services have been requested on this console, so there's not going to be any capacitor replacements or anything like that. Again, it seems to be fully functioning as it is, so I'm not going to worry about that. We have 4 more screws to remove. We have 2 more on either side of the cartridge port. These actually have flared heads on them. If I don't drop them, there we go. And again, there's one on either side of the cartridge port. And then we have 2 more in the top and bottom center of the main board, just above the Player 1 controller and at the bottom below the system ROM. And these are the exact same size as the ones for the cartridge port. However, they do not have the flared ends on them. They're, so they don't, they're different sized a little bit. Easy enough to tell apart, no problem. From there, you just have to kind of grab up on one corner, and you have to kind of do 2 things here. It's going to be hard to see in this, I apologize, but there are some tiny little notches in the plastic frame of the cartridge port on either side, and that's because they designed it so that when you lift it up off the boss post, you pull it towards you just a tiny little bit, and that's enough for it to clear the little catches over here on the other side of the case that the motherboard slides into to kind of hold it into place. Anyway, I'm done with this. Here we are at the main board. Next important thing. Now, it's not critical, not required. I advise it, and that is to remove the LED light pipe, because you're going to be flipping this thing around, and you want to make sure that you don't damage it. You're not likely to damage the pipe stem itself, but you are likely to potentially damage the clips at the bottom where it snaps into the main board. So I'm just going to carefully kind of wiggle it out of there like that and set that off to the side somewhere safe-ish. Okay. There we go. No problems. Very simple board. I like it. It's nice and compact. Now, if you've ever looked at the inside of the Model 1 Intellivision, it basically uses the exact same chips as the Model 2. The Model 2 uses newer chips that do not get as hot, but they still get pretty darn warm. And it's funny because I swear, no 2 Intellivision 2s that I've opened up are ever the same. Major differences I see between them are the amount of chips that you will actually find in sockets. So in this particular case, the CPU and the stick right here are definitely in sockets. I believe this is one of the RAM chips here. I have sometimes seen the sound IC chip here, also in a socket. And there's 2 different models. You can tell an Intellivision II that has the older sound IC chip because there'll be a whole bunch of resistors hanging off of these things. It's crazy. Let's see, what else that's kind of different about these? Obviously, you have this nice little power supply board, just kind of nice. What they basically did was they were able to break down all the different voltages that the original Model 1 used and we're instead able to use a single 16-volt AC input. So again, AC, not DC, but an AC input with rectification and this transformer in here that ends up breaking everything down to essentially just 5 volts. Not sure why they went that route. I'm going to guess it was because of current requirements. Another thing I find different on different Model 2 Intellivisions, and this one's kind of critical, is right up here by the Player 1 controller port, and you can't see that. My apologies. There we go. Off of the Player 1 controller port, there is a fuse here, a 2-amp fuse. I have actually seen newer model Intellivisions from the factory that do not have this fuse and instead are just using like a component lead as a jumper straight across there. When I encounter that, I actually will remove that jumper and install it with a pico fuse. I've got a few pico fuses similar to what you would use like on a Sega Genesis console, for instance, and I just install them in its place, just a little 2-amp pico fuse. So yeah, this one I don't have to do that. Obviously we can see that it has the fuse attached, so that's good to go. All right, so again for this project, this RF modulator will be coming off of the board. Oh, here's another cool interesting thing. I don't normally see this, but this is kind of nice. So right here, this is the stick graphics IC chip. I mentioned it before. This is the chip I'll be actually getting my input signals from for the RGB board. This is the color IC chip right here. And you can also use this one if you want. It's really easy to find the color IC chip because on both the Model 1 and Model 2, it's going to be located where the crystal is. The crystal's always close to that color IC. In fact, this one's more unusual because you'll notice this little drum-looking device here, and this is actually a variable capacitor. And this capacitor can be adjusted and will do two things. One, and its main function, is to adjust the actual clock signal of the Intellivision II. A lot of Intellivision IIs I've serviced do not have this and instead just have it removed with, I believe, just a static resistor or a different capacitor in place as a fixed value. It will also slightly alter the colors if you start goofing with it, but I'm not going to be messing with that. Again, I've already tested this console and it seems to be working just fine, so I shouldn't have to mess with that. So it is interesting to see that in place. So yeah, I'll be removing the RF modulator. It's really not that hard to do. I mean, it is anchored in place securely, of course. You've got, 4 nice soldered down ground points here as an anchor, in addition to the actual pin connections through the vias that power and provide the signal to the RF modulator. But the rest of it is not soldered down in any way, shape, or form, so it's not too bad to get that off of there. Now, as far as the RGB board, it's fairly sizable. I mean, it's not horrendously huge, but it's sizable enough. What I typically do on this is I usually mount it around here. And I use this really strong double-sided Velcro for that purpose. I have just a little bit of it left here. So it's this stuff here. It's made by 3M. It's 3M Dual Lock, and it's plastic-based. And I believe this stuff is supposed to be able to hold up to something crazy like 10 pounds per inch or something silly. So it's not the cheapest stuff, but I like it a lot, and it seems to hold and adhere really well to PCBs, especially if you provide it with a nice flat surface and clean it off really well. So yeah, this is what I typically use to mount all of my PCBs. This way, it also comes off if you really need to. You can use a little bit of alcohol and just kind of take it slow, and it will peel off of PCBs and IC chips usually without leaving any residue. So this is pretty good stuff. This is what I use. But you could use double-sided foam tape or whatever you might have on hand. I've even seen some people that do not even attach the RGB board to the main board. Instead, they'll end up attaching it or affixing it to the bottom of the case shell and then run their wiring that way. But I find that to be very inconvenient. I like to have everything kind of self-contained as much as possible, and I like to keep my wire runs as short as possible. Now, in order for this to sit here nicely, I am going to have to do some trim work here. There's quite a few leads poking up through here that I'm going to need to use my side cutters, my side flush cutters here, and just kind of trim down as much as I can to the main board. And then because I'm going to be using the breakout PCB for the stick IC chip, that is going to be, let me double check the board here, yes. That's going to be this one right here. In case you're curious, just because we're looking at this backwards, This is the color IC chip located right here in this area. And then the stick is located up here. And because, again, I'm going to have the board kind of sitting like this is the input side. So the connection points from the stick are closer than they would be if I was running them from the color IC chip. Okay. There's other ways I could mount this that might, accommodate that a little differently. Like I suppose you could flatten out some areas over here and you could mount it like in the center if you wanted to. And then you could, it's really up to you. It's totally preference. I just find that there's more flat space on this side here. There's less to have to trim to make it flat. So for me, it's just more convenient to just sit it there. As far as the breakout PCB is concerned, it does have pin numbers on it, indicating pin 20 and pin 21. So it's telling us where to place it on the stick chip. And because we are looking at this upside down, pin 1 actually starts from over here. So that means that this is pin 20 and this is pin 21 here. So when I go to put this into place, it will sit like that. This is also nice because it's fairly flat here, so I shouldn't have to do anything as far as having to trim any leads or anything like that to make it sit flush. Yeah. So yep, that's the basic plan. So to get started, I'm just going to get the RF modulator removed first. What have we got here? I'm sorry. Hey, been a while since I tuned in. I last spoke with you about a Sega Genesis. I still haven't opened up to inspect anything, though I haven't run it since either. Remind me again, Chrono Tango, what was up with that Genesis? I don't recall, so I do apologize. Also, as I'm sure you guys have noticed, it's been several months since I've actually released an official video on the channel. And I'll tell you why that is. For starters, over the summer, I had a very big project, a commissioned project, that required me, I'll just tell you flat out what it was. I was commissioned to work on a whole bunch of game consoles. Specifically Atari consoles, to prepare for a convention. And it was just over 20 different consoles I had to work on. And I wanted to make sure that I had complete focus and attention and wasn't rushed for any time and could get everything done when it needed to be done. And the only way to ensure that was to do two things. One was I actually suspended my services to the public over the summer, because I didn't want any of my clients to send a console in, even if they were willing to wait, even if they were okay with having to wait months before I worked on their system. That's just not how I operate. Blaine, if you're still in the chat, you know what I'm talking about. I have a pretty strict policy in that I basically hold myself to a 2-week turnaround on any systems that are sent to me. And as a result of that, I don't like any of my clients to have to wait a long time to get their systems back. They don't want to have to wait, right? So the only way to really ensure that is to make sure I don't have a whole lot of other projects going on that would prevent me from being able to meet that deadline. And this project was certainly going to interfere with being able to provide that level of service to my clients. So yeah, I suspended my services over the summer and basically just didn't have any time to really work on any videos. I guess the other thing is that there just hasn't been a whole lot that's come up that's been different that I haven't already shown in some capacity on the on the channel to really make a video about. Now, having said that, I do have some things I could make some shorter videos on, and I've been thinking about that and just trying to find the best way to go about it. I have some new troubleshooting tools. For instance, I have my Backbit Pro cartridge, which is basically a multi-platform flash cartridge. If you're not familiar with this is pretty cool. I have basically, it's a flash cartridge and it's multi-system because the designer of this, Evie Solomon, over at backbit.io, the way she's designed this is amazing. So you've got this default cartridge shell that has all the logic in it. And then you can purchase different adapters so that you can use this on different systems. And she's got a multitude of systems covered. Basically, every Commodore system is covered. Obviously, there's an Intellivision adapter. That's what this is. I also have one for the VIC-20. She's working and testing on a 5200 adapter as we speak. She also has adapters for the Atari 8-bit line, even the TI-99. So a whole lot of different systems you can use this single flash cartridge for. And the other cool thing about it, again, I'll cover a lot of this more in a more detailed video, but you don't have to have a separate SD cartridge. This thing's smart enough From what I've tested, it seems smart enough to pretty much know when you pop it in, what directory folder that you have ROMs in. So if, if I've got one for like the Intellivision, I have a separate folder called Intellivision ROMs. I would have one for the VIC-20 called VIC-20. If I had one for the 5200, there's also a 2600 adapter. You put those ROMs in those different folders, and this thing's just smart enough to know what's what. I don't know how she did it, but it's very cool. So I'm able to use a single SD card for all the systems that I need it to support. It's amazing. Now, it's not as feature-rich as, say, the LTO. Oh, sorry, Chrono Tango. Let's see. Okay, so back to your Genesis question. It was an issue with plugging the DIN to SCART cable into an HDMI converter. The video would output to my TV. Must be an issue in the chain picking up the line scan. Would scroll like mad. Okay, so if the image was scrolling, that always points to a sync issue. Now, I'm not sure which HDMI cable you would have been using. Let's see, you said DIN to SCART cable into an HDMI converter. So I'm not sure which converter you were using. I happen to use a RetroTink 2X SCART converter, and it works really well with both 8-pin and 9-pin wiring modes that I would use. So I'm able to use it for both standard RGB output for European 8-pin, as well as the Sega RGB outputs. It is also very compatible with my OSSC, which is what I actually use in the game room. So it just kind of depends, I guess. Another cool thing about the use of Crayon's board. Now, this doesn't work 100% for everybody, but it is an option. Because it also provides composite output, again, if you use a 9-pin RGB setup for this, one of the pins on a 9-pin Sega connector is dedicated for composite video. It's pin 4, in fact. And because HD Retrovision cables and some converters actually use the composite video signal instead of the true C-Sync to do what they do, if I run the composite output from Crayon's board into pin 4 of this, it allows me to use HD Retrovision cables, which is another way to get component instead of using the actual RGB. So again, this is an incredibly versatile board when you really think about it. It's also one of the reasons why I actually prefer to use the 9-pin mini DIN. I know a lot of people that do a lot of RGB stuff, they'll kind of yell at me and think I'm nuts for always wanting to use the 9-pin. But look, Crayon has designed it with bypasses so that the signal doesn't degrade when using it on Sega cables. And I've got that extra pin for composite, and there you go. And this new version of his board does not provide for component output, unlike his older version board that he had. So I really think this is a win-win board. I do. And the price he has them selling for is, it's crazy. I like it, but it's crazy. So yeah. Anyway, got me on a tangent. Let's read what we got here. Okay, so I think it was a combination of several cheap things. I used a very cheap SCART to HDMI converter. I'm not sure which converter you might have used. Was it the little black box that's like, the Chinese special that's... Well, it's got horrible lag, I can tell you that, but it pretty much works with almost everything. In fact, earlier RGB boards for the Intellivision tended to only work with that black generic converter box. I actually have one somewhere. I may not have it here in the game room anymore, or in my lab anymore. It's possible that once I got my Tink 2X SCART, I just didn't need it anymore, so I may have actually provided it to a client that didn't have an RGB setup on the cheap just because I was not likely to use it anymore. Or I might have it. I'd have to look around. Anyway, all of that said, let's get to work here. There's a lot to do. Okay, so let's see. Real quickly, I am going to... Right, so one of the things I need to do is to get myself grounded, and I don't have an easy way to do that like I would like. So I am going to solder on a little wire here for ground that I can work with, and there's plenty of places to do this. I'm going to need a little more temperature. So I'm going to work around here. So what I will do is, I got plenty of unused vias along the ground plane up here. Just put that there a little bit. There we go. Get some heat going. Good. And get this little guy inserted in here. This is just a little jumper wire like you might use on a breadboard, project board. Except I'm not able to... Where's my... There we go. It's because I'm off kilter. There we go. Okay. I just wanted to get it in the via, make sure I had a good connection. So that's going to be in place so that I can attach this ground lead here for my wrist strap so that I am at least at the same potential as the board. It's not perfect, but it's better than just working on it without anything at all. Okay, let's see here. System needs a once over. Check over the caps, and I think replacing the power connector, it's loose on the two I have. Definitely a cheap Chinese thing. About the size of a Zippo on its own. Well, that's even smaller. The one I'm thinking of is a little bit bigger. Gosh, I really wish I had something... Oh, man. I'm drawing a blank. Oh, okay. The converter I'm thinking of is actually about the size of this 5200 cartridge. It's obviously taller, but it's about the same size. And, you know, you got your SCART connection on one side, and then you've got an HDMI out on the other. It's got a couple of buttons on it that you switch between PAL and NTSC, and I think between 16.9 and 4.3, as well as some various modes. Like you keep hitting the NTSC button, it'll switch between all the different stuff, PAL 50, PAL 60, and then NTSC, I believe. All right, so because I'm here and I'm thinking about it, let me just go ahead and start trimming up some of these leads really quick down to the board. And again, I'm doing this just to give myself a more flat surface when I go to install the, when I go to place the RGB board, when I go to mount it here, okay? The reality is, I'm not going to be filling the whole thing up with a giant piece of that Velcro, that plastic Velcro strip I use, but this just gives me more versatility. I could probably place the Velcro strips in the middle of this stuff in between it, and it would not be an issue, but it's okay. It's not that big a deal. It only takes a minute or so just to kind of go through this really quick and trim these up, smooth it up. And they don't have to be perfect, but still. Let's see, this one here is going to be a little bit of a booger because it's been folded down and soldered onto the board, so I don't have as much room as I would like for that. But that may not be too big an issue. I don't know. I could desolder it, remove the solder around it, lift the lead up, solder it back down into place, something like that. I might just go ahead and do that. I have to add solder to everything anyway that I plan to remove. It's just easier to get at stuff. Not sure if that can be seen. Hopefully it can. Yeah, I mean, I know I'm not zoomed in or anything. I apologize. Again, it's just a quick live stream. Gives you guys the idea of what I do. Let's see. We've got our 5 volts running here. I can go up along here. There's a via here. There's a via there. I'll probably just attach my 5 volts to that point. I can attach ground to anything around here that I want. Probably, let's see. Yeah. What I'll end up doing is I'll just end up attaching ground to one of these unused sections over here on the board. Oh, okay. Let's go ahead and add some solder. Let's see. Yep, got the temperature up. Good. May have to kick on my fumigator because, like everything, Murphy's Law dictates the solder fumes are going to go towards me. Okay. First thing I'll do is get a little bit of solder removed off of this. Bring the lead up a little taller. Okay. Like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and trim it. and then apply a tiny bit of solder back over it. Okay. And yeah, there's like what looks like a small ceramic capacitor there, and it's still attached to the board perfectly, so we're good. All right, now let's get these other parts off of here, which is going to be the RF modulator. This will be a little trickier, but not impossible. And yes, having this desoldering gun is pretty much my favorite tool for stuff like this. Okay. Now, the rest of the trick with this, now I still have to desolder the connection points for signals, but it's anchored basically with two tabs on the top and bottom of it that have been twisted. So once you've removed most of the solder, all you have to do is get those straightened up like that. Let's see, that should be, yep, that's already separated out from the board. In fact, you can already see I haven't even desoldered the rest of these leads, and the RF modulator is already loose. See, so it's really, really not that hard to remove this. Oh, sorry, I got a lot in the chat here. Let's take a look at what we got. Oh, smaller than that, maybe half as wide. Oh, okay. I've got one of those cheaper ones too. It's working okay. The RetroTink 2X SCART is a much better option though. It is. I'm not sure how much longer. Does Mike Che still have the 2X SCART available on the RetroTink website? I had heard rumors that with the 5X Pro being what it is, obviously he has stopped development on the older products, and I had even been told he might not even be making those anymore. Once he runs out of the current stock, that's pretty much it. I mean, part of me understands. It doesn't make a lot of sense for you know, a one-man operation like him to have to provide support on so many different products, especially when they're similar. And if you got a superior product that handles all of it, well then why not just focus on that one item? But the 2X SCART is a little bit different. And in addition to his, what's the other one that, he's got another 2X that's just like 2X component, basically. Is it possible to recycle those RF modulators? Well, sure. Let me go ahead and get it off of here the rest of the way. So I think that's enough to weasel it out of there. Just about. Let me get some of my tweezers here. Yeah, that's good. That's loose. Okay, that's loose. Yeah, that just came right out. Yeah, this is coming out of here. There we go. So this RF modulator is the exact same one that's used on the Model 1 Intellivision. So, and I think it's used in some other consoles also. Don't quote me on that, but it's a pretty common RF modulator. Now I'm sure that interior-wise, it's been tuned specifically for the signals for the Intellivision, but you know, it's got some trimmer pots on it, probably for video and audio, I imagine. So having said that, you might be able to reuse this and use it for other systems. But I do know that it is the same one on the Model 1 and Model 2. It's the same Aztec brand for both of those. So, and this is working. This is actually going to go back with the when I'm done with the system, any parts that I remove that are still functional, I send them back with the console back to the owner, because while they'll probably never need it, they'll probably never use it, it's part of the history of the console, and some of my customers like to keep all of that together. So even if I was removing all of the capacitors, those would be sent back because they might want them. Hey, I don't know. I'd rather go ahead and send them back to give them that option and let them trash them if they want, versus me doing it, and then they contact me later and they're like, hey, do you happen to have the old capacitors? Or hey, do you happen to have the old RF modulator? And I have to say, oops, I didn't think you'd want it. I can never make that assumption. So I always send the parts that I've removed or replaced. All of the original parts get sent back with the console. So just kind of my MO. All right, so I don't need this anymore. This is done. Get this out of the way. So now if we take another look at the bottom of the board here, or the top side, the component side, you'll see that I've got this massive ground plane that I can attach to. Yeah, this is just one giant large ground plane. So once I get the mount board into place, which is right here, it's going to sit basically in that corner, more or less, something like that. And then this mini DIN is going to sit like that as well. It may be a little bit forward. The way I usually line this up is I will get the case, the bottom shell here, and let me temporarily unhook myself, because this is going to be fighting me a little bit, because it's not going to want to fit in here. It also helps if I have the case turned the right way around. There we go. And it's fighting me because I've got my ground strap. There we go. Okay. So with it in here, I can now get my little mount board. I can kind of just, eyeball where that needs to go. And then as far as this connector is going to be concerned, I'm just going to kind of manually line it up with my eyes here, just to kind of see where it needs to go. And it's basically going to attach on two sides very securely, which will be along the back and along the right-hand side of it, and a little bit on the left-hand side. But I mean, if you put enough solder on this, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just not. Another advantage to doing this, which may seem obvious to some, maybe not to others, the Genesis 9-pin mini DIN is a little weird because it does not have a dedicated pin for ground. And so as a result, you're like, well, how does it get ground? Well, the entire outer ring right here, this whole outer ring is ground. And the way that that works is once this was actually installed properly, either way, the actual points here are attached to the ground. So this whole thing becomes your ground connection. And we're going to be accomplishing the same thing. When it gets soldered down onto a place like this, it's grounded. And that means all of the signals going to it also have ground, because that's how it's been designed. So you don't technically have to run a separate ground wire from off of the RGB board back to this connector, because the whole thing is on ground already. So sometimes I do, just as an extra precaution, I'll just run another extra piece of wire, some thick gauge. Well, I say thick, it'll probably be about like maybe 28 gauge or 22 gauge. No, I'm sorry, not 28, but yeah, definitely like some of my 22 gauge wire. And I might run that just from there and just solder it down to a point somewhere along here just to provide an extra ground connection. But it's all going to be ground. It's all the same thing. Okay, so what I need to do now is go ahead and get my mini DIN bracket, or the little PCB, soldered into place. So to do that, go ahead and get reattached here. I'm going to clean up the area. This is just some alcohol I keep in a nice little spray bottle. It's a high-grade electronics alcohol. It's 99.9%. I actually can buy it locally. It was pretty cool. During the pandemic, when the pandemic first hit and everybody's scrambling to the pharmacies to get alcohol and it was like sold out everywhere, all I had to do was go to the hobby shop and I could buy the electronics grade. They had plenty of it. Yeah, it's 99.9. It's more expensive than your standard 70% isopropyl, but it'll still clean up a cut all the same. I sometimes have to do that. I don't know about anybody else, but it's pretty rare for me to work on a console and not leave some DNA behind. I'll end up poking my finger or something on a lead that's sticking through the other side, the solder side of the board. Something silly like that. Also use old t-shirts. Old cotton t-shirts are really good for cleaning down nice surfaces like this. So just wiping that down, just making sure that it's a fairly clean surface. I'm going to need a lot of heat, so I'm going to be turning my soldering iron up to about, where am I running here? I'm running at about 425 Celsius right now, which is, wait, which S-Video mini DIN connector is the default? CKing, can you explain to me exactly what you're asking? I will state that the kits that Crayon provides are basically little S-Video panel mount jacks like this one here. I don't typically use these because the only way to attach this, it does require a smaller hole to be drilled into the case, but you have to epoxy it into place. I use a different S-Video jack. It's not perfect, it's not the best, but it works better for my needs. Let me pull one of these out of here. And it is right here. So this S-Video jack requires a larger opening. It is basically 14 millimeters, or actually it's 13 and a half, but 14 is about as close as you can get. You can also use a 9/16 drill bit. So it does require a wider opening. But what I like about this one is that it's actually threaded on the back, and it comes with a large nut, securing nut on the back, so I can screw it down into place a little bit. Now, I'm not going to lie, I still end up having to apply some epoxy because you're still putting a round object in a round hole, and even with this nut into place, there's nothing to really just, it's just tightened force to hold it into place. It's still going to slip over time, so I still apply a little bit of epoxy on all of my S-Video jacks just to make sure they don't slip. I do not normally do that with my RCA jacks because I use star washers on the RCA jacks versus the default little lock washers they come with. Most of the RCA jacks will come with something like this, these little split ring washers. I don't use them. I purchased these marine grade stainless steel star washers and use those, and man, you rough up the plastic a little bit and that thing gets tightened down enough and grips, it's not going anywhere. It's really, really tight. Okay, let's get this soldered into place. So what I'm going to do is just apply a tiny bit of flux along this bottom edge. And then I am going to apply a very thin coat. I don't want to make it super thick. I just need a thin coat of solder across it. It's just enough to kind of put a thin coat on there, because what's going to happen is once I go to apply this onto the main ground plane here, with enough heat, the solder around the edges should begin to seep under it. So now what I'm going to do is apply some more of my liquid flux in the area where I'm going to be soldering into place. There we go. Set this off to the side. And again, this is going to set basically right in the corner here. Pretty much just like that. Now, this is going to be very hot when I go to do this, so I will usually use like a cotton bud. And initially, let me get it started. Again, what I do on this is I will apply some solder into the castenated vias on the sides that I had designed on these boards. Okay, I'm starting to hear it sizzle. That's a good sign. Seeing already it's trying to stick, which is what we want it to do, basically. Okay, just kind of hold that into place. Use this cotton bud so I don't burn my fingers to death. Now, I'm not holding down on it tight. I want to hold onto it loose because I want that solder to get really hot and try to start to seep itself under the board a little bit. Okay, that's what I want it to do. All right, now that that's in place, I'm going to flip it around a little bit. If I knew you were doing this, I would have sent you my Intellivision II to work on. Well, like I said at the beginning of the stream, I had to suspend my services to the public while I was working on a larger project for a convention. And so I just started taking commissions again about 2 weeks ago, maybe, something like that. So the first thing I did was just kind of contact a lot of people that were already kind of being very patient and waiting for services. And I've already got, more people still that want stuff done. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is to lightly tip this board up. Let's see if I can use, there we go, that'll work. I'm using one of my arms from my quad helping hands here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a lot of heat to the top of this and feed it. And what that should have done is gravity should have helped me out by allowing that solder to seep down even further underneath the board and help lock it and secure it into place. And I can actually see it bubble up a little bit on the front edges when I do this. So that's how I know it's working. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, although I apologize, you're not going to be able to see it because it's going to be off camera. But okay. Now the other cool thing about this that really helps is there is a hole right through the bottom of this. And that is another really cool thing because it allows me to easily throw my iron in there and throw some more solder in to make sure it gets down in there and seeps in where I want it to. And in fact, what I can also do is just to really make sure, get something here like the flat blade of this screwdriver, scrape away some of the solder mask around the edge of this. This is already pretty hot, by the way. I don't have to scrape away too much, just a little bit around the edges. Okay. There we go. And now what I'll do is, it should be pretty obvious, I'm going to be hitting this with a lot of heat, a lot of solder, and we're going to coat the whole thing over if we can. Unfortunately, it's not a full via, so it's going to fight me a little bit. I should have put some flux on there. It's already sizzling. See, it's pretty hot. All right, let's try this again. Let's get this heated up, move this down. It's just not wanting to stay in there. That's all right. Not too worried about it. I know it's going to stay. Go ahead and get this off of here, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of some of this extra solder. Okay. Let's clean that up a little bit. I like to hear it squeak. That's good. Okay. That should be on there. Yeah, that's not moving. So that's the little mount PCB. So the next thing to do is to get the mini DIN itself soldered into place. And for that, I will typically put it into the case to make sure I can push it up flush where it basically needs to go. And in fact, there's already some solder in the way here that I'm going to have to flatten out. Or what I will actually do is remove it off the board really quick. There we go. The other thing to do is similar to what I did with the mount board, is I'm going to apply a very thin coat of solder to the bottom of this mini dent. So just get a little bit of flux on there. Don't need a ton. And get ourselves a nice little thin coat. And then I keep it on the little PCB breakout board because that'll make it a little easier for me to smooth this around without touching it, because of course it's going to be pretty hot. Okay, just like that. Got a nice little decent little thin coat of solder. I can take this, set it down onto the mount board, basically where I want it to go. Kind of line this up a little bit, which is going to be about like that. That's about right. Okay. Get some more solder. And what I'll do is I'll just lightly kind of attach it along the back side just to anchor it. And then we'll finish attaching it from there. Okay. Now I got to hold on to it while I do this. So again, I can line it up where I want it to go, which is going to be about right there. And yeah, that looks pretty good. Now let me go ahead and take it back out. Again, it's not in there secure as I want it just yet. It's just kind of tacked into place where I need it to be. All right, so now comes the rest of the fun part where I really get it into place. And you're probably not going to be able to see this, and I do apologize, but I will show you how it looks afterwards. Yes. Let that cool off for a bit, because of course it's very, very hot. It also looks pretty ugly until I clean it up. Might attach a little bit more, or put a little bit more along the back. Woo! That does get warm. Yes, the RetroTink Mini converts it to all H. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just catch up here on what we've got on some chats here. Let's see. I knew you were doing this. Oh, okay, yeah. You want to get a RetroTink like me. That thing converts the S-video better than any cost-effective solution I've used to date with no lag. Yes, I agree. The RetroTink products are amazing. They really are quite something else. And it looks like the microphone might be clipping. Is it getting a little too loud? I can try to reduce it down a hair, see if that helps. Let's see. Yes, the RetroTink Mini converts it to all HDMI. My 5200 looks amazing on my Sony 4K. Now, Dogimon there, I know you well. So I actually put a UAV board into Dogimon's 5200. So that's what he's talking about. And yeah, the UAV board in a 5200 is quite an amazing upgrade. It really looks fantastic. This video add-on board for the OSSC works well too. I've heard about that, Wizards with Machinery. I haven't really looked into it myself, and I'll tell you why. I do have an OSSC, but the way that I actually have all of my composite, component, technically, RGB, and well, basically my composite and my S-Video consoles connected, is I am actually using an Extron 7SC multi-AV switcher converter scaler. It was inexpensive. It's old technology from like the early 2000s. But it was inexpensive, and it uses BNC connections on the back and allows me to connect, like I said, S-Video, composite, RGB, component, and VGA. All of those to 7 different inputs. And then the really cool thing about that 7SC is it converts all of those signals to a single standard VGA output that I can then lock the refresh rate and resolution at. And then, of course, I'm feeding that into my OSSC. So my OSSC on all of my classic consoles is technically taking in a VGA converted signal. I can never do that soldering without a fan blowing on me. Those fumes must be giving you a headache. No, actually, they're not. Normally, I do have a fumigator. In fact, I just turned it on. And for the most part, you can't really hear it because I have a noise gate filter applied, but you might be able to hear it as I talk. Now, in this particular case, I was doing this pretty quickly and it wasn't too bad. But now that I've said that, let's go ahead and clean this connector off. Now, to make it a little easier, I'm going to take my breakout board off of here. Use a whole bunch of alcohol. Because I used a whole lot of flux, and of course a whole lot of flux came off of the solder as well when I was putting this into place. Also, Dogimon, the solder I use, it's kind of dangerous. I'll tell you why. It smells really sweet. So it doesn't actually, it's not horrible. It's got a really sweet smell to it. I just kind of lucked out with that. It wasn't intentional. It just, yeah, I just kind of lucked out with it to happen to have a sweet smell. Let me get a fresh Q-tip here. There we go. And again, I'm just trying to clean this up a little bit, just get some of the flux residue off, make it look nice and shiny. All right, and there we go. So you can see that it's soldered in very securely to the board. I'm pushing on that with quite a bit of force. So yeah, that's in place. And then, so you can get an idea as to how it looks when it's installed. And I'll even throw the top cover on as if it was being all put back together so you can see how it orients. into place. Let me move back over here. There we go. There you go. So see, it's pretty much at the perfect height we need for the cables. In fact, I have, is this my 9-pin? 1, 2, yes. So here is my 9-pin RGB cable right here. And I just have to, now again, it's mounted upside down, so I have to plug it in upside down, but there it goes. I'm trying to get it on the camera. It's hard to show. My cable doesn't pull out enough. There. So yeah. Nice no-cut solution. And again, once I get the RGB board in place, I will be wiring the composite output from it to pin 4 on this connector. And that will also allow you to use standard Genesis Model 2 composite AV cables, and then you can use the composite and audio that way. So I don't have to run any additional RCA jacks. Now I have had some of my clients request me to install secondary RCA jacks, but it's not required in this instance. Another really cool advantage to removing the RF modulator on these boards is it allows me to reuse the channel select switch as the palette switch to switch between the two available palettes on this board. And the way you do that is with the RF modulator removed, there is a double check now. Let's see, where's the switch? There it is. Go here, 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 here. Ah, here we go. There are 2 vias right here that are completely open now. And what this did was this originally provided a 5-volt signal to this to the switch. So basically in one position it's completely open because this is not connected to anything at all. It's either this one or is it this one? One of these two is connected to ground on the edges and the other one is open. It's not connected to anything. So when you had it in one position, you basically had the 5 volts going into nothing at all, and that would be one channel. And when you flip the switch to the other, that's when you bring 5 volts to ground and it signals to the RF modulator to switch to the other signal to provide it and provide your signal on the other channel. Well, with the RF modulator removed, that 5 volts is no longer present, so you have an empty available trace, and that's where I attach the one and only wire I really need for the palette select here to that empty via, and then I can just use the channel select switch to switch between the palettes. Again, no cut required, and it's all in place right there. And this switch is a lot easier to get to and use than it is on the Model 1 where it's on the bottom of the board. So yeah. Very nice. Let's see, since I'm already thinking about it, we're already here, let me go ahead and I will get this put back into place. See what else we have on the chat here. Practice makes perfect, kind of like touching a hot stove as a kid. You learn pretty quick. I'm that idiot that manages to burn himself whenever I solder, so I prefer to have a pro fix my older consoles. Well, I've mentioned this to some people in the past that have asked me. I kind of learned how to solder through a very unconventional means. And I learned to solder when I was about 10 years old, but not on electronics. Nope. I learned to solder because my stepdad and I took a summer course on stained glass windows. And you have basically 2 different types of stained glass windows that you see. You have what they call leaded, and you have copper foil. And because I was a young kid, I was only about 10, the copper foil method was deemed safest for me to do. And literally, you get your glass, your colored glass, you use a glass cutter to score it to the shapes you want, you break it loose, you use a glass grinder to shape it, and then when you've cleaned it all up, you actually use copper foil. Copper foil tape goes all the way around the edges of the glass, and when you put your different pieces together, then you use the soldering iron and solder. Of course, it's leaded solder, but you just kind of run along, and that taught me to not be afraid of the soldering iron, to respect it, to not touch hot things that I shouldn't. And it also allowed me to learn how to do a fairly nice, controlled, even flow of solder along the edges, which is how I'm able to get a nice bead. So yeah, I technically learned how to solder by doing stained glass windows when I was about 10 years old. Now, it was a different kind of soldering iron, but Same basic techniques. Now what I'm doing right now is I am folding over the tabs, the ground tabs, anchor tabs, whatever you want to call them, for the breakout board here on this 9-pin. And because this middle opening is so large, I'm kind of having to reform this front tab a little bit. So I'm going to fold it down. Here we go. Get this out. There. Okay. Now that I've got that pressed and flattened up there, I will get my iron back out again. I need to reduce the temperature just a little bit. It's still running at blazing hot temperatures. Okay. And then I'm going to run a little bit along the front, like that. And then I'm going to completely fill in this cavity as much as I can. Like that. All right. I'm going to clean this up more after I get the pins soldered into place. But for now, I'm just kind of giving it a little bit of a clean. Now we'll get everything else put down. Just to prevent any possible bridging with the other vias on the other side, I will turn this around. You may not be able to see this, but oops, there we go. Okay, that's in place. Now I'm going to use the big bottle of alcohol so I can dip my cleaning toothbrush in it, get it really saturated here. Okay, much better. Practice makes perfect. I'm better with digital graphics than real life materials. So, digital graphics. So, does that mean, Hatman, that you are you're a digital artist? Would that be a correct statement then? Now, this is also something that's not required. It's just something I do. I tend to trim off the tops of these, make it a little flatter. Hit this one from the sides. It's about time to replace these. These are getting pretty dull. They've got some nice little nicks in them. It's my fault. You know, cutting and trimming things I probably shouldn't be, because there is a limit to how thick. In fact, it says that the maximum diameter is copper wire of basically 0.04 inches or 1 millimeter, which would be most decent sized leads or thick leads. Okay, so now that I've trimmed this up, what I'm going to do again is hit it with a little bit of heat and the iron and ball them up. Make them a little smoother if I can. It's just to get rid of any sharp edges. Okay. A little more cleaning. And because I smoothed it up, I can now use the Q-tip without it tearing it up. The Q-tip cleans up a little bit better. It absorbs. See? No sharp edges. I like it. And it looks good, too. It looks nice that way. So that takes care of the actual mini DIN connector. So that helps out with that. What have we got here? Modding the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advanced is all I'm comfortable with so far since they're easiest. Don't know what I did wrong with my Game Boy Color. I modded an IPS screen into my Game Boy, but when I screwed it back together, Mario jumps randomly and repeatedly. Sometimes, like the A button keeps being pressed rapidly, pushed, but I'm not pushing it. It doesn't look like it's crossed any wires when I open it up, so I give up. Well, obviously, if a button, any button, is being activated, unintentionally when you put a system back together, then what's going on is that button thinks it's being depressed. So that means that somewhere, a wire somewhere is pushing down and grounding that signal, intentionally or otherwise, and that's why it is doing that. So if you were to just take your meter in continuity and put it on the A button, you would probably find that when you applied it to the two different contact traces for the A button, you'll find out that they're shorted somewhere. So that's what it is. Your A button is simply shorted down to ground somewhere, and you just need to find out where and break that. It's very possible that when you were working on it, that some solder could have dripped onto it somewhere. It happens to me. It's very frustrating because it's not something you may notice or see, and then you're having to examine the entire board after the fact to look for something like that. Okay, now comes the not as fun part, and that's going to be getting the rest of this soldered in and wired. And let's see, what time are we at right now? Where are we at? We are at, it is a little after 8 o'clock my time. So that means we've been on for, what, about an hour and 15 minutes, give or take? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead, and this is already good to go. I'm going to go ahead and solder on the breakout board for the stick, which again just sits right there. You don't have to use these little breakout boards. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could just solder wiring directly to the legs on the bottom of the IC chips. But what's really nice about this is that it provides you with a larger surface area with these pads, and they're clearly marked. You know that in the case of this board, the pad marked A matches to the pad marked A on the input side of the main board. So, you know, it's just follow the bouncing ball. There we go. Now, I'm also not going to be using all of these signals. I've done a video on this already, and I actually described this, and I do mention this. I do not advise using the 5 volts off of the stick IC chip. That's because I have found that voltage can be variable. In addition to that, it doesn't seem that the voltage gets turned on until there's like a delay. And as a result, it can cause problems with the board, the RGB board, essentially not switching on when it should. So I don't use the 5 volts off this board. You could use the ground, but I don't worry about that either. That's because, again, when I go to mount this into place, and again, it's gonna basically sit like this, right? I'm just going to take my 5 volts and ground from other places closer by. I don't need to necessarily run wires to them. So I'm only going to be using the clock, the A, B, C, D, and E pads. So the very last 2 pads on this will not be used, which is the ground and 5 volts, because I'll be getting them elsewhere. But what I will do is go ahead and tin up these pads. To get them ready. Okay. Now the next thing to do is to clean off the area where I will eventually be installing the Velcro strips. And because this Velcro stuff I use is so strong, I don't like have to cover the entire bottom of the board. You know, 1.5 inches square or length of the Velcro on either side is going to be plenty to hold this thing in place. There is one other thing I need to do. Part of this is going to, of course, require me to run wires from, or what they call conductors, from the output side. Actually, I got this around the other way. Hold on. There we go. I'll have to run conductors, wiring from the output side back through the PCB and onto my connector up here. Now, the easiest way to do that, I think, is to actually use a bar file, like this one here, and I actually widen this anchor hole right here that was used for the RF. And if I make it wide enough, then I can just run all of the wiring and just feed it right through there without any issue. Now, this does make quite a mess, so I'm going to do this off to the side here while I do this. If you don't have a set of small bar files, I highly advise getting them. Not only is it kind of critical for casework modification, like for instance, if you're adding HDMI ports or if you need to add a switch and you need to make an opening for it, but it comes in handy for stuff like what I'm doing here, where I'm making a modification to the actual circuit board, an opening that's already on it that I need to make larger to accommodate for some extra wiring. And this isn't a very quick process, so it will take a little bit of labor here to do this. Let's see, I need to remove a little bit more material. The wire that I use for my output wire tends to be, it's only, it's 26 gauge, so it's fairly thin, but it's silicone insulated jacketing, and that actually tends to be kind of thick. So it's requires this to be a little wider than you might initially guess. That's just about got it. While I'm doing this, let me look and see what else we have in the chat. Let's see, modding the Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance. Okay, we went to that. Doesn't look like it crossed any wires. I hate taking it apart, so I found something that weirdly fixed it. I unscrew all the screws of the console halfway and the problem... Okay, so I'll tell you what that means. That's a pressure issue, And it pretty much confirms that one of your wires or something that you have in place is shorting where it should not be. And the reason why it went away whenever you loosened up the case shell is because whatever it was that was pressing up against it causing that short is no longer making good enough contact. So it temporarily fixes the problem, but it doesn't really fix the problem. So you should probably take another look at that. As much as you probably don't want to, if you want to fix it right, you need to take a look at it. Okay. That gap should be large enough. I don't know if you'll be able to see what I've done, but it's right here. And again, I just used my little bar files and just kept going in and out of the opening just to make it a little wider, okay? And that's just so it can accommodate some of the wiring I'm going to be fitting through there a little bit later. Okay. All right, so let's talk about my 5-volt and ground. Where am I going to get that from? Well, it's actually pretty easy. So these leads sticking up right through here, these are coming on the other side of the power supply board. And this thick lead, or this thick trace right here that's got 2 leads poking through it, that's actually 5 volts to both of those. So you can just solder your wire for your 5 volt right in. I usually just solder it right in the middle of these 2 pins. There's also some spots along the edge here, so I've already got a little bit of solder applied here. I might even just solder the wire, my 5-volt wire, to that. And then as far as ground's concerned, well, ground's all over the place. You know, take a spot. I've already decided that I'm going to just solder my ground wire to this unused via right here, or this pad spot right here. So that'll work for me. Okay, so to make this a little easier for myself, I need to get some wires. I need to get some conductors. So I tend to keep pre-cut strands of various wire already around. If anything is about, I don't know, 2 to 3 inches, I don't usually throw it away. I keep it. I even have a box. This is going to be funny. Some of you might think this is hilarious. Where's it at? Ah, here we go. So a box that I originally had shrink tubing in, I changed it, and I now have converted it into my little spare sections of wire box. So yeah, you know, I basically have like the shortest lengths that I'm willing to keep are going to be stored here, which is probably, you know, 2 to 3 inches in length. And then as they get a little bit larger, I just kind of go up. And then finally I have larger sections that I coil. But I also have, you know, actual wire. I have ribbon cable that I can cut to length and use. But for small stuff, this is perfect. You know, I like to keep a lot of this wire on hand because I just don't know when I'm going to need it, right? Let's see, I don't think this blue one's going to be long enough for anything. So let me just kind of throw that in here. Let's see, I've got this green, I got this, I got some red here that I can use. This red's actually solid core. It's real thin solid core. I don't want to use that. I mean, I could. This board's not going to be moving around anywhere once it's in place, but I just prefer not to use that. I actually am going to just use, I'll probably use the brown and red off of this section here. And that's going to be plenty long enough. So let me just go ahead and cut this up. I know some people like to keep the ribbon wire intact and trim it up and make it all look nice and pretty, but I'll be honest, it's easier for me, really, to just cut it, pull it, and just deal with separate strips. So does it look as awesome? Well, no, I guess not. But if you cut it to the right length, it really shouldn't be a problem at all. It really should not be an issue. Let's see here. So let me get some wire for the power. Let's see. Since that's going to go to here, I need to run to about here. Well, that's plenty long enough. Let's see here. What I'm doing is I'm just kind of unofficially measuring up some of my silicone jacketed wire here that I'm going to use for my power and ground. I do not need this much, but I'd rather have more wire than not enough, because then I end up just essentially feel like I'm wasting a section of wire. Okay. So what I'm going to do for most of this is I'm going to go ahead and get the wire soldered onto the board first on the input side. I'm not going to worry about the output side. I'll just have to feed it and just kind of have to fish with it using my tweezers. But at least for the input side, I'm going to go ahead and get it initially soldered in. And that way I can kind of route it how I need to, trim it, cut it, whatever. All right. Now, I don't have to do it this way. I mean, it's just as easy, of course, to just solder directly onto these pads on top, you know. And either way, I'm just making it look a little nicer by putting the wire up through the bottom of it. Okay, so there's my power and ground already attached. So again, once I get this put into place, I'll be able to route these, and I'll have plenty of, in fact, I've got way more wire that I need for my ground, because it's basically just going to attach to just right here. I mean, that's like an inch. That's okay. I'll cut off and I'll have enough of it left over and I'll put it away somewhere. I'm sure I'll find a use for it. Okay, so what I need to do now is I need to cut up the other wires that I'm going to need, which is going to be, let's see, I'm going to need clock, I'm going to need the other alphabet letters. And I'll probably reuse some of these colors. I don't normally like to do that. I normally would like to use separate colors whenever possible. I might be able to. Let's see. I've got green, yellow. I've got this thinner red, brown, orange. Okay, so I've got clock, A, B, C, D, E. I need one more wire. One more wire. And that can be... just use some gray. That will work. Anything new in the chat? Got that box complete. I hate taking it apart. Okay, I found something. Okay. I got that box complete ColecoVision from Paradise, California for 60 bucks. That's a good price on a box CV for sure. Funny you're modding an Intellivision because they now have an original boxed one of those too. Is it the Model 1 or the Model 2 there, Dogimon? Let's see, box complete. Oh, box complete ColecoVision I meant. Okay, and now an original boxed Intellivision, mostly complete. I use different colors, and I always assign black to ground and red to VCC. Yeah, Kaon, I basically do the same. Sometimes I'll use orange. Sometimes I'll use yellow for my voltage, but I always typically will use red or black like you saw me do here. Sometimes I'll use green for my ground. I will do that, except in the case of the RGB, because I'm obviously going to want to run a red, green, and blue wire off of this, then yeah, obviously I don't want to mix my colors up. So in that particular instance, because I'm going to have a red wire coming off of this, I will probably use yellow or orange for the 5-volt coming off of this back to the 9-pin mini DIN, because I do need to run a 5-volt connection to that. And again, I'm not even going to have to worry about the ground. I don't even need to worry about it because the whole thing is attached to ground. It's plenty of ground, no problem. Yeah. Okay, so for the rest of this, it's going to be very similar. Let's see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this gray wire for the clock. And this is just, this is all, I mainly use 26 gauge stranded for a lot of stuff I do. I do have some solid core. I have some 22 gauge solid core, but I don't use that as much. It's a little thicker than I need. And of course it's solid core, so, you know, you can only bend it back and forth so many times, but I do sometimes use it. I've got this nice little box up here of some different colored solid core wiring. So that's handy if I need it. Okay. Let's see. And then I got my A, B, C, D, and E stuff. Let's go ahead and use green, because that's my shortest wire I have here. So I'm going to use that for connection A, because that's one of the shortest runs besides the clock. And I'm not sure if my music's coming across. Hopefully it doesn't, it's not coming across too loud. It's got a wood finish to it, I believe. What are we talking about? Oh, I use different colors. It's got a wood finish to it. Oh, the wood finish. You mean the Intellivision, Dogimon? That would be a model 2609 Intellivision. That's got the wood grain. It could also be the Tandyvision. That has a wood grain pattern as well. The Intellivision they have at the store is very gold-looking disc on the controller and console. It has wood grain design look, so I assume the original model kind. Yeah, that pretty much meets, or that would be the original model 2609 Intellivision, which is not a bad console. It's got kind of a weird power distribution on it because of the transformer that it uses inside, which is almost unobtainium if that goes bad. So all I'm doing right now is just quickly trimming up these little pieces of wire I've got. I don't really care if they're too long or not, because I will be trimming them up to size when I solder them onto the breakout board. But for now, it's just a little easier to just go ahead and get these soldered up. And on the board itself, the RGB board, go. I realize you can't see me doing all this. I apologize. I will show you what it looks like when I get these in. Shouldn't take me too long. Anyway, I was talking about my music, so hopefully it's not coming across, because it would probably cause a copyright strike. I'm listening to Opus Science Collective, OSC. I've got his entire discography digitally, and I'm actually playing it back right now through one of my Roland sound devices, my MT90U, because it has the ability to do MIDI files and MP3s. All right, I've only got just 2 wires left on the input side, and then I can go ahead and get this thing Velcroed into place. Trim these up, solder them onto the pad, and start going from there. Now there is a total of, let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total wires that I am soldering onto the input side. It's a total of 8 if you count the power and ground I had to do earlier. Okay, so there's all my input wires in place. Okay. And even though I'm using another red wire here for one of these video input leads for the board, it's thinner gauge and thinner type of wire than my power and ground, so I can easily tell it apart. That's not going to be a problem. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to trim these up because it's all kinds of crazy lengths I've got going on up here. Okay, it's a little better. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean the bottom of this board. It's already fairly clean, but doesn't hurt to give it another quick wipe down with some alcohol. Use the bottom of this old t-shirt once again. Oh, there's one more wire I want to attach on here before I forget. I'll just use this black, this thin black that I've got sitting here. This is going to be the wire for the palette switch. Now, I only have to attach, now the palette color select, excuse me. Let me get something to point with here. I need a pointing thing. I'll just use this. So this is the color select pads here. One of these is ground. It happens to be the one that's the square pad. That's ground. And the other one is the actual signal detect, or the one that's going to complete it. Normally, you would run 2 separate wires from here. You would run one to ground or to one side of your switch. You would run the other end to the other side of your switch. But all it really needs to do is this select pin here, this pad here, just needs to be grounded. When you get this thing into place and you attach it to ground, all these pads are already grounded. So you only need, in the case of this install, because I'm reusing a switch that's already on the board here, the channel select switch, and because part of that switch is already tied to ground, I think you know where I'm going with this. I only need 1 wire. So yeah. So I'm just going to get this stripped, and I'm going to run this little piece of wire through the one side I need. Except it's catching on my wrist strap because the wire is really too darn long. That's okay. Okay, that's in place. Trim it up. There we go. So this long black wire I got here is going to be what I eventually run to this via right here. And then that way, when the switch is in one position, it will ground that signal for the color select line to ground as it needs to, and it'll be one color. Flip the switch to the other side, circuit it becomes open, and it'll be the other color. So very easy to set it up that way. All right, so now that I've cleaned and wiped up the board, it's time to get my Velcro into place. So again, I don't need a ton of this. It actually looks like if I just pretty much cut this in half, I'm going to be exactly where I need to be. So that's what we're going to do. All right. Now, I'm being very careful to, when I apply this Velcro that I'm going to be using, I'm making sure that the strip and size that I'm using is not going to cover up any vias, because I am going to need to solder to some of this, and I want to make sure that I have easy access to them. In fact, these vias right along here, I'm going to need for my red, green, and blue output lines. In fact, I wonder if I should maybe go ahead and put those on, because those are going to be a lot trickier to solder to. So let me get an estimate of how much wire I'm going to need. See, I was hoping I'd have, oh, I know what I'll do. Remember, I've got this box of various wire lengths. Now, I'm not going to be using this wire, but I'm going to be using this as kind of a measure, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this in through one of the openings. Let's see, the blue bypass is going to be the farthest one. Well, won't quite fit through there like I'd hoped. That's okay. So if I basically set this down where I want it to go, and it's going to basically sit right about there, and feed this through here. So what I'm doing is I'm basically getting an estimate of how much wire, or how long I need my wires to be for my outputs. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit more than I need. Okay, that's going to go basically like that. And then kind of lay it down flat a little bit like that. Kind of come up here. I'll tell you how long I end up making this. And we're going to just overestimate. So trim it right about there. Okay. All right. So how long did this actually end up being that I think I'm going to need? It's just a little over 5 inches in length. So what I'm going to do to make sure I have plenty of wire is I'm going to cut 6 inches. Okay. So I'm going to use this wire as my guide. I know these are such official measurements, aren't they? Technically, this 5 inches of wire is probably more than enough. So just kind of get a guess, a roundabout guess. And I'm just concerned about my red, green, and blue, because those are going to go to these bypass pads, and they are going to be more inset and a little more difficult to wire to from the bottom once I attach this down. So the others are not going to be fun either, but I can use my tweezers to get to them, so it's not a huge ordeal. Okay. All right. So those 3 pieces of wire should be good enough, and I'm going to put this extra out of the way. Now that I've cut this, it's not quite as long as it was, so it's going to go in a different bin. That's okay. I'll find a use for it. I always do. That's why I keep it. I would let Jesse confirm. Okay, what are we talking about here? Hold on. Hold on. Okay, you know, Genesis Model 2 only has an RGB port, no RF port, and yet it has an RF adapter that has an RGB plug on it. So you could probably use RF through that. Oh, I'm sorry. We're talking about something else here. Got a question. Does your model disable RF output? Oh, does the mod disable RF output? Okay, so you're talking about on here, or are we talking about the Sega Genesis? Because yes, I mean, I've effectively removed the RF modulator, so there is no RF output. Now, if you wanted to keep the RF intact, you could do so. The problem you're going to run into is where you're going to mount the mini DIN, because there's really not any other room along the back side of this to do this. You would have to try to mount it along the bottom, but once again, you're going to be running it's going to be tricky. But, you know, I've not really thought about that, but I suppose you could. I suppose it could be possible to strip away or to scrape away some of the grounding here. Now, you'd have to be careful. You've got other traces here for other signals, and you don't want to short against anything. You don't want to short against the controller pins. But I suppose you could take the mini DIN and perhaps solder it to the bottom side, and there's probably enough room, I think. I don't know, you might be cutting it close. There's only about 1 centimeter of space between the bottom of the PCB to the bottom of the shell. You know, so even when I put this in place where it's going to go over here, it's going to be pretty close. Okay, now, similar to what I did to the input lines, I need to strip these out really quick and solder them onto the outputs for the RGB. Just going to go ahead and just get these cut and stripped really quick. Twist them up, tin them up, put them through, solder them down. And at that point, I will be ready to go ahead and attach this RGB board onto the mainboard PCB, and yeah. I may have to take a break here for a little while because my wife already came upstairs to the tower earlier asking me if I was filming. And the reason why she was probably coming up here was to tell me that there's probably sustenance, food, ready for me to eat. So I'll probably want to give myself a little bit of a quick dinner break in a not too distant future here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get these bypass wires. Now again, because I'm wiring this up for Sega Genesis 9-pin use, I'm not going to be using the red, green, and blue output pads down here. Instead, I'm going to be using these up here. They're actually labeled as BB, GB, and RB, and that means blue bypass, green bypass, red bypass. Specifically, I'm going to be attaching my output signals for the red, green, and blue lines prior to these 75 ohm resistors. The reason being, these resistors typically already exist inside of most Sega RGB cables. So while it will technically work if you use these output pins, you will find that the image is going to be duller and darker than it should be. And it may not work properly depending on your TV. So this is actually my small little contribution to these boards, because when I was first installing the older version of the boards, I complained about that to CKing, saying, hey, you haven't, we need a way to be able to use Sega Genesis RGB cables. And he was like, why would you want to do that? Who uses those? And I said, a lot of people. Anyway, he redesigned his board when he made the OP, the orange peel, so that it would be more easy to use Sega RGB cables. So I may not contribute a ton, but that was my little contribution. It was just to get that suggestion in there, and he did it. He looked into it and he made it happen. I'm very grateful for that, because again, it makes it even more versatile. Okay, just got one little last wire to put in, solder in. Trim it up. There we go. So now I have my red, green, and blue output wires right here. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to attach this thing down now to the actual main board. So I'm just gonna get this off of here. I'm really only gonna have really just like one shot for this, because again, this stuff sticks pretty good. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, there's quite a bit of leeway on where to place this. There we go. That should be good enough. Just gonna push this down into place a little bit. There we go. So you can see that I have this now mounted on here. And as far as how thick it is, it doesn't really stick up off the board that much. And again, this Velcro is crazy strong. I'm literally just holding on to it by the board and shaking it around. It's you kind of actually have to peel it off at an angle, and sometimes you even have to stick something under it to do it. Okay. So I'm not going to be soldering these in just yet. I'm just going to feed them through here just to get them out of my way. These are my RGB signal lines. Now, of course, there's obviously more to this than just these. I also have to get the sync, my 5 volts, and my composite. There. But there should be plenty of space in there to be able to shoehorn some more wires. Okay, so now what I need to do is get the rest of these wires on my input side trimmed up and put into place. So let's see, here's my clock wire. So I'm just going to kind of go like that. Actually, before I put these in, I think I'll go ahead and put my power and ground wires in first. So let me go ahead and just feed this underneath all the others, because this wire will solder to technically right about here. So let me cut right here. Okay. And you know, you don't have to be all gung-ho on getting these links exactly like I am. I just, you know, this console is not mine personally. This belongs to somebody, and they are paying good money. So I want to provide a professional look. I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of like a car mechanic, right? My own consoles the wiring tends to be a little bit messier. But that's also because my own consoles tend to be the experimental systems. You know, they're the ones that I do the work on first to verify what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. Let's see, is that an actual via? I can run that wire through. I'm just using some desoldering braid here to see if this is an empty via. It is. Awesome. I kind of thought it was, but I'll be honest, I don't always use the exact same points when I solder to stuff. Okay. Now this is my 5 volts that I'm running here, that I'm connecting up. Awesome. And is it sticking up on the other side really far? No. We're good. Okay. Awesome. And then I got my ground wire, which is this thicker black one. So let me get that. Now I'm actually just going to solder it to this point right here. And I believe that is also an unused via. So let me... I have to turn this around a little bit at a different angle so I can see it. May have to turn the heat up on this one. Okay, there it goes. Yep. All right, and this does not need to be very long at all. Oh, this is so short, this is going to be a little trickier to strip. I will make it happen. Got it. I'm going to take a quick pause, see what we've got in the chat. What have we got going on here? Okay, install a separate RF port. It would be tons easier than having him install separate RF plug. Okay, wait a minute. There's a whole lot of stuff I got to catch up on. Hey, Crayon's here. Those RGB bypass pads have a secondary function I never bothered to implement. That being, you could have an add-on mixer to make component from the RGB, which is why it has that weird L shape to the pads. You know, I noticed actually that it mimics very closely the L shape that's used for the daughter board add-on on Tim Worthington's RGB boards for the 2600. It has a very similar setup, very similar. If you really wanted to plug this modded Intellivision into RF on an old TV, you would probably just need to get the RF adapter for Genesis Model 2 that has RGB. Well, that might actually work because it's pretty much converting the RGB signals to the RF. It's basically an RF modulator inside of the box. Install a separate RF port. Where can I find an AV mod for the Tandy MC10? Tandy MC10, Keon, you're gonna have to educate us. I'm not familiar with that model Tandy. What is the MC10? Is it? I'm gonna assume that stands for microcomputer, and the 10 is a model number. I left my RF modulator intact on both my NT2609 and 2 with the baked potato RGB mod, and just mounted the mini DIN to the case itself and double-sided taped the RGB board to the underneath of the motherboard. You could certainly do that, and using Crayon's panel mount jacks, that meant that you use the 8-pin. Because that's what he provides as an 8-pin panel mount. I don't think anybody provides a 9-pin panel mount in the same style. But you could certainly do that, and there's certainly room to mount it under there along the bottom of the RF or along the bottom of the case shell. That's basically how I would. That's basically how I do the RCA jacks. Except again, I just put them on the far side. Oh, it's a Trash 80. Okay, so Keon. Okay, so it's a TRS-80 computer. Gotcha. I don't know. I'm not. I actually learned BASIC on the TRS-80s in high school. It dates me a little bit, I realize. But it's not a computer I particularly have any nostalgia for, so it's not one I've actually worked on. So I don't have an answer to your question, unfortunately. I really don't. I'm sure that that there's probably something. But right off the top of my head, I'm not exactly sure what would be what you could use for that. That via did not clear out as well as I had hoped. Let's increase some temperature. Let's put some more solder in place. Okay. Let's clean this up. Let's remove it back off of there again. Hopefully this will get all of it out of there this time. I'm watching it seep up along the copper braid. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Let's trim this off of here. All right, now should be able to get this ground wire. Wouldn't you know it? So the problem I have right now is that the solder, there's too much of it that has beaded up on the edge of my wire. And I need it off of there. Okay. I think that's thin enough to now fit into the V8. Yes, it is. All right. Let's get this soldered into place. Don't want to melt that one. Nice. Okay, so there's my power, there's my ground in place, trimmed up nice, distance is good. Now it's just a matter of getting the rest of them in place, and we're just going to start from here to here. So the first wire is going to be my clock wire. So I'm just going to kind of curl it around like this, just kind of eyeball where I want it to go. Trim, put that off to the side because I'll probably keep a little bit of it, like always. Trim just a tiny bit off the top, like that. Need to lower my iron down. The jacketing on this tends to shrink up quite a bit. Not my favorite, but that's... Okay. Trim some of it off of there. Now, I'm going to turn this around the other way. There's my clock. Next is A. I don't know that they make a 9-pin panel mount crayon. I've kind of looked, but yeah, I just haven't seen it. Lots of versatility with the RGB port. Because assume you can use the RF composite or RAD. Oh, you can use RAD2X cables. I have been told that RAD2X cables will work. Again, you need to wire up the composite because the RAD2X cables are basically small, tiny retro tanks for a specific console. So it's a tiny retro tank in a box. And the retro tank, I'm sorry, well, yeah, it's retro tank, but it's using, as far as I know, it uses the composite sync for that. Microcomputer, without disk drives, without joystick support, only relies on cassette tapes to read programs. Oh, that's painful. Unless you make a cassette cable that allows you to communicate through modern audio devices. Gotcha. Yeah, cassette loads are a painful thing. Painful, painful thing. I made my brown wire a little longer than I would have liked, but that's okay. All right, only got one wire left here. For the, well, this is just, again, this is just the input side. This is, I don't have the outputs done yet, but I'll probably take a short break and either do that a little bit later, or I may just wait and maybe I'll stream again tomorrow night. Maybe. Zero Page Homebrew will be streaming tomorrow night, and I usually watch that, so we'll see. It really wouldn't take that much longer to get the output wires put in, at least for the video. I haven't even done the audio, but that's a nothing thing. Really, that's not that big a deal. Okay. So that takes care of the input side. Now what I'm going to do is always verify that I have things connected where they should be. So breaking out the meter here. First thing I'm going to do is verify the clock pad. Good. A to A, B to B, C to C, D to D, E to E. Golden. And then I'll verify my 5 volts. Again, these two pins here are 5 volts, so just go to here and here. It's not attached to ground, so we're not shorted to ground. And then to check ground, I'll just put the probe over here and good. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and get this other wire. Again, this is going to be my signal wire for the palette switch. So I'm just going to kind of move this over loosely around the side here. That might be a shorter run if I go this way. Yeah, I can do that. I got plenty of wire. So I can just go like that. And just need to loosely attach it to that via there. Nice long piece of leftover wire. I'll obviously store that for later. All right, now this one's going to be a little trickier because the this wire is so thin. So what I'm going to do is put a little bit of solder already into the via, and then I'm just going to go like this. Done. Okay. Now, if we want to check if that switch is going to do its job, again, all I got to do is just check continuity. So remember what I said earlier, that one of these pads for the color select is already on ground. So you'll see here that I'm going to put one side of the probe to ground and, I'm going to put it in beat mode. There we go. So see, this square pad is already tied to ground. So you don't really need to run a separate wire for that because we're going to be reusing the switch. So all I need to do to verify the switch is going to work is I'm going to put one of the probes here, put the other one on the other side, and not cross them. So see? Awesome. Oh, hey, I just noticed ZPH is here. It takes 16K. Oh, we're talking about the computer again, the microcomputer. Thank you for watching. Absolutely. The cartridge only have 3K. So there's a whole other discussion going on over here outside of the RGB setup. That's cool. So yeah, that's how the color select switch is wired in. So I can just use repurpose the channel select switch for that use. Works really well, looks nice that way. Okay, so as far as the RGB output goes, I've already got these initial wires in place, so we might as well just go ahead and run them. And we can start with the blue. So yeah, I actually eyeballed that. I guesstimated that pretty decently there on my distance needed. And I get one of my quad hands over here. Get that tinned up. And go ahead and feed that through. Just like that. Takes care of the blue. And let's see, then we got the red wire, so it's just right here. It's going to basically okay. Okay, so there's going to be at least 2 more wires I have to attach before I can even test this through my setup. And that's going to be the sync and the 5-volt. Audio and the composite, that can come a little bit later. All right. Let's see. So for sync, I'm going to use the white. I'm going to use this white wire here. Again, I'm just going to kind of eyeball how much we need. We're going to end up with some extra on this because these don't have to go as far necessarily. Let's see. Let me get this yellow. I'm going to use a yellow. Well, actually, I'm going to use yellow for composite. Let's see. So I'm going to have to choose another color to use for my, let's see, I use blue for audio. I've got red, green, blue. I don't really want to use that. I'm arguing with myself. Don't worry about it. I know what I'll do. I'll use this orange I've got here. So I'm going to use this orange wire for my 5 volts. Or better yet, well, yeah, I'll go ahead and use this orange for the 5 volts. I was contemplating using it for the composite instead and use the yellow for the 5, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that I know what's what. That's what matters. Okay, so the 5 volt needs to be fed. Now, actually, there's 2 places you could do this. You could feed 5 volts either from here, or you can feed it from over here. And I'm just going to put it over here on this output. Get my tweezers out. There we go. Now the 5 volts is being ran because a lot of converters and scalers use this 5 volt line to detect the signal. Check the chat real quick. What do we got here? Seems to be 3,300 you have. Oh, saw you were live and thought I'd see what you were up to. Jumping off and back to work for me. Talk to you soon. No problem. Appreciate it, James. Although he probably sent that who knows how long ago. I don't get it with the capacitor sizes. Even if there are 4,700 microfarad caps smaller than that. I guess I'll have to catch up on what you guys are talking about a little bit later. All right, one more wire is needed to test all of this, at least the video output, and that is my sync. So let me just get this tinned up. This is almost already at the length I need it to be. I could have just trimmed off a whole lot more off of that and then just cut it off after the fact. Okey-doke. Okay, that should be the bare minimum to at least verify that the RGB output is working. What is technically left to connect up at this point, for those that have been following along, is really just two more wires. I just need to run the wire for the composite, and then I need to get the audio situated. Now, as far as audio goes, it's dead easy on these Intellivision IIs. One of the vias that we removed when we took the RF modulator off was the actual audio input to the RF modulator. So there are literally 3 vias right here that are completely open, and you can just attach your wire directly from there and run it straight to, in this case, because I'm using the 9-pin, I would run it to all 3 of these vias. And that's to make sure that any audio cable that's used, if it's a mono only cable, or if it's actually the stereo cable, you're still going to get audio on all of the channels, regardless of which cable type you plug in. So that's that. And then the composite video is, again, there's a separate pin here marked CVID, which is for the composite video line. So that's really just the only 2 left. But at least for testing purposes, I have enough connected up to at least get something video on the screen. So let me disconnect myself here and throw the bottom shell in just to have something to sit it on. Like that. And get my 9-pin cable in place. Okay, that's nice and plugged in. Get some power. And I need to switch the input on my monitor. Okay. I realize you guys are not going to be able to see this at first. I'll see what I can do to, maybe I'll fire up the webcam on my laptop and flip it around or something. Okay, got my back bit plugged in. I know you can't see that, but you have to trust me. There's my back bit. And what I'm going to do is just to hold it down while powering on. Nice. Okay, I'll see what I can do to spin this around so you guys can see it. Give me a moment. Oh. I'm just making all kinds of messes over here. Okay, let me see if I can get my webcam visible. I don't see it. Let me try muting this. There we go. Oh, hey, hi, everybody. Okay, so yeah, you can barely make it out. I apologize. But this is the test screen here. And so it is definitely up and running. And the palette switch is working as normal. I know it's not clear. It's all super washed out. I apologize. The webcam on this thing is less than ideal. But I'm sure you can see the hues changing around the borders. So yeah, it's working. No problem. Successful. What have we got? What happened to getting dinner? I guess the answer is yes. At the stage it is now, can it be tested for video only? Yes, Keon, it can be. That's what we just did. So let me go ahead and switch this back off. Oh. Yeah, Dogimon, you're right. What happened to dinner? Well, you know, I have weird eating habits, so I will go get food. I'm sure I'm going to have to nuke it. And I'll get grimaces from the missus. But it'll be fine. She's put up with me for this many years, and she supports the hobby, so I cannot fault her at all. She's a wonderful woman. Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to do for tonight. Again, the only two leftover things to do is just a wire for audio, as well as for the composite video. And I can do that at any time, really. That's just 2 additional wires. Everything else is in place and working. So yeah, cool psychedelic poster. Love it. It's actually, I'll be honest. So this is my youngest son's room, is what was converted into the lab. After he grew up and decided he didn't, it wasn't cool to hang out at Dad's anymore on the weekends. And after about a year, I needed the space. I originally used to do my videos a couple of years ago in the game room, actually. I was using my Galaga. I have a Galaga cocktail arcade cabinet. That's my meter trying to time out on me. I have a Galaga arcade cabinet that I have in the game room, and I actually have a blue anti-static mat on it. And most of the original videos from the first couple of years, all of the service work was being done on that Galaga cocktail. Crazy. But anyway, once my boys basically stopped coming over because they're older, they're adults now. Then I just took the smallest of the rooms and moved all my stuff up here, turned it into the official lab. Anyway, that's his poster. There's also a black light in the corner of the room. So playing Jaguar on one screen and seeing this mod on another, this is interesting. I'm playing with my CRT TV service mode menu, a whole new world. You know, I had an old Samsung True Flat that I got into the service mode on, and boy, was that a nightmare. It took forever for me to get that monitor, to get that TV adjusted back, and I never could get the geometry on it right, which was the whole reason why I went into the service menu. I eventually just gave up on it, and probably about 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, I actually sold that TV for like $150 off of Craigslist to somebody that wanted it, because it had composite, it had S-Video, it had component, and it actually had not one but 2 HDMI inputs because it was a true flat Samsung. It was a widescreen 16:9 HD CRT. It was able to go up to 1080i and could do 720p. So at the time, you know, 7, 8 years ago, it was a really good TV to use for gaming on. But I wanted a bigger screen because I think that was a 32, I think it was, 32-inch display on that. And it was heavy, crazy heavy. So I wanted a more modern flat panel, and was already in the process of video upgrading, modding my consoles for that. Anyway, yeah, so let's see, where are we at? Oh, look at that. It's almost 9:30. Holy cow. I appreciate all you guys hanging out. Hopefully you guys thought this was kind of cool and interesting. I know I don't stream that often. Largely because it distracts me, obviously. You know, I got to pause what I'm doing to kind of take a look at the chat, answer any questions, things like that. And of course, I'm explaining what I'm doing along the way. And so that's not necessarily, you know, it just takes a little longer to do stuff. Anyway, I will catch you guys another time. Again, I appreciate you hanging out tonight. And hopefully, you know, I've done an actual video on this as well, a tutorial installation video on the exact same thing you just saw. In fact, the very last video I did was this exact thing that I actually published to the page, to the YouTube channel. But now you can actually see the process for yourself and how I do it by hand. So, thanks again, everyone. And hopefully I'll have some other videos up soon. I got some work to catch up on for clients because, again, I paused my services during the summer, so I have some people anxious to get stuff done. And I'll catch you guys another time. So, again, appreciate it. Thanks.